Hello everyone, welcome back to lecture 6 of CPC with Dhruti Bharia. This is Dhruti Bharia interacting with you first time through a lecture. And today's topic would be first hearing, trial, judgment and decree. In the previous classes and the lectures we have covered written statement, we've tried to repeat written statement, we have gone through counterclaim, set off, then we have gone on to summons and then the appearance and non-appearance of parties. So as a logical movement forward in this process, we would now see that after the parties have appeared or they have not appeared or whatever the court decides in that case, we would now be moving to what the first hearing that is taking place, the trial that will happen, and then the judgment and the decree. Now, before moving forward, I do understand that the lectures are getting a little lengthy and it might get difficult for you firstly, because of the nature of CPC in itself to be a little mundane and boring. But I really don't want to increase the number of videos more than a particular number that I have in mind. Right now, I won't disclose how many, but and I know it might get a little daunting to go through a lecture of 1 hour lecture at one go. So this is why I've mentioned timestamps in the comments. You can, according to your own time and convenience, you can go through them topic wise as you want. So this is what I wanted to share. So let's move on to today's lecture and we'll first start off with first hearing. Now, as we see, first hearing is again not expressly defined in the code as such, but what is first hearing? It is that day when the court has decided that it gets the pleadings of parties have appeared, everything is there. The court for the first time, it's applying its mind, it's actually looking into the pleadings and seeing what are the contentions put forward by the parties. First hearing cannot be called the day when, okay, in the date of appearance, when the summons was given to the defendant, a date was fixed. However, on that particular date, the court did not go into the matter or did not actually look into the pleadings. That day would not be called the day of the first hearing. First hearing will only be that day when the court is actually trying to apply its mind. It's looking into the pleadings and trying to understand the contentions. Now, what happens is that when it has got the pleadings, it's trying to look into it. Naturally, it will go forward how to frame issues, how the settlement of issues would take place. And whenever these things are done, that day will be the first hearing court suit. And however, in small causes courts, there are no issues framed. So the first hearing there will be the day when the trial is starting. So first order that we have to see in relation to first hearing is examination of parties by the court. Now, Rule 1 of that order states that from the first hearing, court is trying to ascertain how each party or its pleader is trying to admit or deny the allegations of fact made in the pleadings. Now, what are you admitting? What are you denying? Will be recorded. Now, what will be the next step? Now, next step is that if the court feels that the denials and admissions have been taken in place, then the court can feel that, okay, this is a matter which might not need as much as a judicial adjudication as such. So it can say that, okay, we want to suggest that you should opt to one of the settlement modes under Section 89. But what is Section 89? Section 89 is recognizing that there are certain other modes where you can settle the disputes outside court. And what are those modes? That is arbitration, conciliation, judicial settlement, including settlement by Lok Adalat, mediation. Now, on this aspect, on referring to Section 89, you can see Rule 1, Rule 1B, and 1C. I have not dealt in detail. You can also see Section 89. You can understand that if by going into the admissions or denials, if the court is feeling so, it can refer them to such modes of settlement also. Now, what happens next? Now that the court has gone into the pleadings, it has made a recording of the admissions and denials. The court may also feel like it shall, that is compulsorily, it orally examines the party and any other companion of the party, it may if it feels so that it can elucidate what are the actual matters in controversy, or any other person who can actually answer any material question to the suit. Now, this particular thing, it's not necessary that it has to be done only at the first hearing. In the subsequent hearings also, the court can put up questions that the other party is suggesting certain questions that also the court can put up. Now, what is Rule 3? Rule 3 is stating very logically understand if the court is orally examining the party, obviously such examinations need to be written down and they will form a part of the record. That is Rule 3 for you. Now, Rule 4 states that if the pleader is there, if a pleader is appearing and he's refusing to answer a particular question or he's unable to answer a particular question and court feels that if I am give him certain time, then he might be able to answer, then the court may postpone the hearing. How much? For a hearing for a day, not later than 7 days from the date of the first hearing, and where they may even call the person to appear personally, the person on whose behalf the pleader is appearing to come and appear personally and explain. However, if he does not fails to appear on that day and he does not even have any lawful excuse at why he has not come on that day, court may pronounce any order that it deems fit. So this was order 10, which was telling us what? That how the examinations of parties is being done by the court in the first hearing. Now that we have seen that, now we will come to the next thing. Now, because the pleadings have been taken, all the admissions, denials have been taken on record, etc. All oral examination has been done. Obviously, what will happen? Now we will try to frame the issues. Now, again, issues as a term has not been explicitly defined anywhere. So what can issues mean? They can mean a point in question, which is a subject of a debate or litigations. Now, issues are very important. Why? Firstly, they're forming the backbone of the case, and evidence, whatever evidence you are giving, you have to give for the issues. And where do you draw up these issues? These issues are drawn up from the pleadings. And issues should always be confined to material questions of law and facts and not evidence. Issues should not be of evidence, because issues should contain the fact and the questions, and evidence should be given for those issues. And in logical sense, again, as we write, as I have said earlier also, when you're writing an essay, you deal with one point in one paragraph, or whenever you're writing an answer, you deal with one point in one point. Here also, every issue will deal with only one point. Even in an appeal, the appellate court also, unless there's extreme necessity as such, the appellate court also deals with the issues that have been framed by the trial court. Now, we see, because of the importance of issues, it is the duty and the power of the court that it should frame proper issues. The issue should be clear and definite, and it should not be vague and evasive. So the next thing that we go on to is dealing with Order 14. Now, Order 14, Rule 1 states that you have to frame issues first. Issues, when do they arise? When one material proposition of law or fact is affirmed by one party and the other party is denying that. And what are material propositions? We've already seen that those facts or laws that is a party to prove in order to show either his right or his defense. Now, all those material propositions that are affirmed by one party and denied by other will form the subject matter of a distinct issue. And what kind of issues can be there? It can be of fact, law, or they can be of mixed issues of fact and law. So at first hearing, what we will see is that after the court has gone into the pleadings and oral examination, then they will ascertain what are the material particulars of fact and law, where the parties are standing at a variance, and then it will move forward to frame and record the issues. Then what happens? There's one situation where you do not need to frame and record issues, is that when you have summoned the defendant appears and he admits that, and he admits the liability, or he's making no defense at all. And in that situation, you do not need to frame and record issues. Now, rule number 2 states that a court at any point has to decide and give judgment on all the issues has been framed. Even if it is deciding a preliminary issue, it has to also decide upon the other issues. There are only 2 situations when there is issues of law like jurisdiction or bar of suit created by law. In those situations, first the court will deal with these 2 questions and then only proceed further for the other issues. All the other issues will be decided after this particular issue has been decided. For example, if the court rules that it itself has no jurisdiction to try a particular matter, obviously it makes no sense to decide the other issues, because the court itself has no authority to look into that matter. This is why in these 2 situations, like jurisdiction and bar to suit, first that issue will be decided, and the other issues settlement will be postponed. Now, rule 3. Now, from where are we getting these issues? The materials from which issues may be framed are, first, the allegations that have been made on oath by the persons or the parties that are present, allegations that are given in the pleadings or the answers to the allegations that have been given, or the contents of the documents that have been denied by the parties. Now, what does Rule 4 states that? Now, Rule 4 states that before framing of issues, again, the court has a power that it can examine witnesses or documents if it feels necessary. And it can, if it feels that for framing issues, it can also adjourn. If it feels that first I need to examine a particular witness, or I need to go and look into a particular document before framing of witness, framing of issues, then the court can also adjourn the framing of issues for a maximum period of 7 days. Now, obviously, because the court is having a power to frame the issues, obviously it's not possible that every time everything can be comprehensively be done in the first hand. So there is a power that the court has where it can amend and strike out issues. That is before passing of the decree. Very important. The decree should not be passed. Before that, at any point, the court may amend the issues or may frame additional issues, or even strike out certain issues which it feels are not important. So considering that you have to do justice. So for doing justice, if you feel that you need to change certain issue, or if you feel that the court feels that something else also needs to be there, or something needs to be deleted, that can be done. Now, rules 6 and 7, you can go through that. There are where the issues are stated in the form of an agreement of the parties. So this was rule 14 for you, that is issue, settlement and framing of issues, where we saw how the court is dealing with settlement of issues. Now we move on to, that was order 14, I'm sorry, not rule 14, order 14. Now we move on to order 15, which deals with the disposal of the suit at the first hearing. Now what happens, that there may be certain circumstances that when the parties come before the court, there are situations where the suit can be disposed of at the first hearing itself. Here, this is where we are dealing with it. So rule number 1 states that if the parties are not at all at issue at the first hearing, if the court is seeing that they are not at all at issue with each other on any question or law or fact, court will pronounce judgment on the same. Now, rule number 2 says that if there are one or several defendants and some of them are not at issue with the plaintiff, then in respect of them, a judgment will be pronounced immediately, and the suit will proceed only against those other defendants. And now when a judgment is pronounced here, a decree for the same will also be drawn, and the decree will also bear the date of the judgment. Now, rule 3 states that if the parties are at issue on certain facts, questions of law and fact, issues have been framed, and the court feels that there is no other further argument or evidence that can be advanced that will further any other cause. All that is needed for giving a decision in the case is already there with the court, and there is no injustice that will be caused by doing so, then it can determine that issue and pass the judgment at the first hearing itself. Now here, under rule 3, now here the summons should be the summons can be, obviously what can happen, the court doesn't know, the summons can be for the settlement of issues here, and the parties and the pleaders should be present, and they should not object that yes, that the judgment should be pronounced at the first date. Now if they feel that no, if their finding is sufficient, if they feel yes, there is a reason that if they feel that okay, I feel that all these particulars are enough for pronouncing a decision, but they feel that, okay, we might look into further evidence or further argument that may require, then they may postpone the further hearing and fix another date for production of further evidence or further argument. Now, naturally, next thing what will happen, rule 4 says that if there is a failure to produce evidence and summons was given for final disposal of suit. Now, either party of the suit, either party has failed without giving any sufficient cause, that why they have not been able to produce evidence on which they were relying, then the court may at once pass a judgment or whatever it deems fit after framing and recording the issues. Here, what we are seeing in rule 4 is that the court had given you time, that okay, I'm giving you summons for next hearing, it will be a summons for final disposal, we'll go for final disposal, bring all the evidence and etc. that you want to rely, and the suit was adjourned for the same, and then on the next day, either of the party has not come with evidence, they cannot explain why they could not come with evidence, then the court is at once pronouncing judgment or whatever it deems fit, because this particular day was fixed for production of evidence by the parties. Otherwise, the court would have already passed a judgment. So the court here is passing a judgment. So this is completing order 15. So in a nutshell, what did we see? We saw 3 orders. First order was that of order 10. Now, as we were revising, we'll just go through it again. First thing, when the court is trying to examine the parties, the parties first, at the first hearing, what did we see? That the court is trying to ascertain that what allegations are being denied or admitted. If it feels that there is a there can be a reference to section 89, that can also be done. Here parties or other persons can be examined orally. Now if there's any examination, obviously you need to record that substance in writing. If you are not able to answer, refusing to answer, and court feels that if I give some time, they might be able to answer on the next day, or the person himself may be called for answering, then that postponement can be done for not more than 7 days. If still that person has not been able to answer or refuses to answer, then the court can pronounce a judgment in relation to it. This was order 10 in a nutshell. Then we moved on to order 14, that was settlement of issues and determination of suits on issues of laws, etc. Here we are seeing framing of issues. On what are we framing issues on? On material propositions of facts and law, which is admitted or denied by other party. They can be of fact, of law, or mixed issues of fact and law. If nobody is making a defense at the first hearing, then no need to go into framing of issues. Otherwise, you have to always frame an issue. Now, judgment should always be given on all the issues, unless there's an issue of jurisdiction or bar of suit by law. There, first you have to decide this issue, and other issues settlement will be postponed, depending upon this issue. Now, the next thing is that from where do you get all the material? From where are you framing this issue? You're framing it from allegations on oaths that is being made, or from the pleadings or the documents that is being produced. The court may also examine witnesses before or documents before framing of issues, and the court will obviously have power to amend or strike out issues, or add issues before the passing of the decree. And why will it do so? For determining matters in controversy, or whether they have been wrongly framed or introduced, etc. So this was settlement of issues. Then we are trying to understand order 15, that is disposal of the suit at the first hearing. So we understood when the parties are not at issue, that the court can do so. If some of the defendants are, or one of the defendants is not at issue, then in respect of that particular defendant, the court will pass a judgment and a decree will follow, and for the rest the suit will follow. If the parties are at issue and there is no other further argument or evidence needed, in that case also it can be done. If summons has been given for final disposal, and then you're failing to summons for final disposal, and you had asked for production of further evidence, etc., but you yourself did not appear, then also the court can pronounce judgment, or if it feels so, it can frame issues and adjourn the suit for evidence. So this was the first hearing where we dealt with order 10, 14, and 15. 10 was telling us how the examination of parties was done by the court. 14, where we saw how the issues were being settled. And 15, when we are seeing that in the first hearing itself, the suit is being disposed of. Next, now we'll move on to the issue of trial. Now what we see is that what have we seen till now? Here we have seen plaint has come, pleadings have come from both the sides, issues have also been framed. So next step what can be there is, we can first call the witnesses. So for witnesses, we are seeing section 30 to 32 and order 16 to 18 are for the relevant provisions. We'll first deal with order 16, that is dealing with summon and attendance of witnesses. We are seeing that rule number 1 to 7 in a gist. We'll try to cover rule number 1 to 7 in a gist. So what is to be seen? Now we saw that issues have been framed. Now we see what will we do next. We'll try to call witness. Obviously, we'll try to take evidence. So we first try to call witnesses. How do we deal with witnesses? We are seeing that now. So first thing what will be done is, the parties, whoever I want to call as witness, I'll draw up a list, and then I'll tell that this is the people that I want to call for producing evidence, for giving evidence, or for producing documents. And then parties will apply for summons to be given to them. And this has to be done as soon as possible, but not later than 15 days after the issue has been framed. Now, why are we doing so? Why are we providing a list of witnesses? We are doing so that the other opposite party can examine the witness and the evidence produced by. They can also be prepared, like, okay, this is a particular set of witness that has to come. They'll be also in a state of mind that, yes, I have to examine this in this party. Now, court can also allow calling of those persons who are not mentioned in the list if they feel that there was sufficient cause for omission and for production of documents or evidence, etc. They can do so. Now, here we see under Rule 1 and Rule 1A, there's a difference. Now, in Rule 1A, the person can call a witness without seeking the court's assistance. They'll not seek the court assistance, and there they are being allowed, even though they had not mentioned the person's name. But in 1A, court assistance is sought. That is why you have to already provide a list of witnesses. However, apart from that, under 1A, if the court feels so, then it can suo motu also summon certain party as a witness to a court there, but generally it is not done so. And Rule 1A was included by the 1976 amendment. So 1A, where you are not seeking the court's assistance in for summoning a witness, but you are seeking the court's assistance in calling that person. So another thing, very logical, if I am trying to call certain person, then obviously all the expenses that would be incurred for the same should be borne by me. Whichever party will apply will pay the expenses for the same. Now, what would be the contents of the summons? The contents would be that it will tell us what is the time and place where he has to attend, what is the purpose, whether he has to give evidence of a production of document, and if he is being called for document, you have to also mention the document. Now, under Rule 7A, now you can, one more thing, that you can relate this entire order with the summons that was issued to the defendant that we were seeing before. Here you can see under Order 5, the party who is calling the witness can himself also say that I will go and tender a copy, I will do the service, I will go and service the summon. They can go and tender a copy personally, and if in this case also, if you can remember Order 5, if the service was refused, then the court on its own application can also apply for reservice of summons. And if the party is serving on his own, if a service of summons to a witness is being done under Rule 7A, then obviously here you don't need to give fees or need to take fees, because they are doing it on its own expense already. The court doesn't need to do anything. So this is Rule 7A. Then Rule 8 and 9 are saying that again, there are also similar rules that are applicable for summons to defendants will also be applicable here. And again, you have to give them reasonable time for preparing the case, and also that they will be required. The travel time also should be taken into consideration before you are fixing the date and time for them to appear in court. Now, what is Rule 10 saying? Rule 10 saying that what happens if a person is failing to comply with summons. Now, what happens if there was a serving officer has not given a certificate? In that case, it is mandatory. And if the certificate is verified, then the serving officer may be examined to know that what happened, why is that the person has not come, did you service it properly, etc. or not. Then if the court feels that there was a failure without sufficient cause, that is the service was done properly, etc., then the court can issue a proclamation in this regard, saying that this is the time and a place that I'm fixing for appearance, and you need to appear. This is the purpose that you've come, and this particular proclamation will be stuck on a conspicuous part of the house of such person or on his outer door. Now, what is another thing is there, that while issuing a proclamation, warrant can also be issued at the same time, or later on, with or without bail, and orders for attachment of property can also be made. However, we have to also note that no small causes court can make an order for attachment of immovable property. So under Rule 10, if there is a failure to comply with summons, first the court will go after the serving officer, that did you service it properly or not. After they have examined them, they feel that no problem, and they feel that there is no other reason why the person did not comply with the summons, then a proclamation will be issued fixing the date and time. Again, go and stick it on the conspicuous part of the house or the outer door of the person. And apart from the proclamation, a warrant may also be issued with or without bail, and orders for attachment of property may also be done. Now, the above, whatever the orders have been passed under Rule 10, they can be withdrawn if the party or the person has appeared and he is explaining his reasons, if the attachment, etc., can be released. Now, other than that, under Rule 12, we see that other than those factors that we are seeing under Rule 10, under Rule 12, if the party is failing to appear, fine not exceeding ₹500 may be imposed. Then attachment of property can be made. If it is already made, then sale can be ordered. And if a person is paying the fine and the costs that can be imposed, the property may be released. So this, under notwithstanding anything that is contained in Rule 10, here the court can impose fine after giving notice to the party to show cause why he did not appear. So that is there. Now, rule number 13 is telling you that what would be the mode of attachment. The mode of attachment will be same as that attachment that goes against a judgment debtor. Now, what is this? We'll see in the later classes in execution, etc. Now, rule number 14 and 15 is that when the court feels, here the court is also having the power that it can summon strangers as witnesses. If it feels necessary that they need to be examined or they need to produce certain documents, then the court can summon strangers as witnesses, and it will be the duty of that person to come and appear in court and do whatever they have been called to do so. Now, rule number 16 says that a person who has been summoned and he is attending the court, he has to do so till all the hearings, till the suit is disposed of, unless he's directed that he is okay, now he's exempted from appearing. Now, what can happen that sometimes it is important because you want to ensure that sometimes the court may feel that somebody has either made an application that you need to pay payment of necessary expenses has been done, etc. They may be required to furnish security that they will attend the next day, that they will be required to attend the next day, or they may even be made to detain in civil prison. So in order to ensure that their attendance is being made. Now, rule number 17, if you are again not summoned and then attending and you're not doing so, again, you'll follow rule number 10 to 13. Again, the above rules will apply. Now, if you see that there is a procedure also given that if a person, that is, I think, rule number 18, if a person has been apprehended and because of which he is not able to come give evidence and document, then the court can give them bail or give them reasonable time period to produce the same. And rule number 19 is telling you that no witness will be ordered to attend court which is not within the local jurisdiction or which is at least less than 100 kilometers or 500 kilometers if there are transportation facilities available. These are the three factors that the court has to consider before calling a witness. You cannot call somebody, order somebody to attend court if they are not outside the jurisdiction. If they are outside 100 kilometers, they are outside 500 kilometers of transportation facilities. But however, if air transport is available and the witness is being paid the airfare, then he may be required to travel. Now, rule number 20 is saying that if you are refusing to give evidence or producing document without any lawful excuse, then the court will pronounce judgment or order in respect of the same. And rule number 21 says that if a party in itself is appearing as a witness, then the rules of witnesses will be made applicable. So this was order number 16, which was dealing with what? Which was dealing with the summoning of witnesses and attendance of witnesses. Now, order 16A is also another order where we are dealing with attendance of witnesses in prison. You can see that, you can go through that, not that important. That I don't feel that's very important. And section 30 is also summons for productions of document. Now, the next thing that we go on to is that now we have seen that we have called the witnesses, etc. Now we can see that generally there is always a rule that once a hearing has begun, it should continue till it has been finally disposed of. However, it is not really practically possible that every suit can be continued till its final disposal. There are adjournments granted, but there are rules for it, there are order for it. The relevant order is order 17, and that which states that adjournment should be granted only for unavoidable reasons, and that granting of adjournments is not a right of the party. You cannot come to court and say, no, you have to adjourn it. It is the discretion of the court for granting an adjournment. So rule 1 states that a court may grant time and adjourn hearing if sufficient cause is being shown at any stage, and it may grant time to the parties or any of them for reasons recorded in writing. And it also gives a proviso that no more than 3 times adjournment can be granted to a party during hearing of a suit. Now, whatever cost has been entailed because of such adjournment or whatever higher cost that the court feels, it will fix a particular date and impose the same. So what it is saying, proviso is also saying that once hearing is commenced, it has to continue day till day, day to day, until all the witnesses have been examined. Unless for exceptional reasons and recorded reasons, it has been adjourned for the next day. And no adjournment can be given unless the circumstance is beyond the control of the parties. Now, for situations like when you can say my pleader is busy in another court is not a ground for adjournment. Other reasons like illness or inability of a pleader to conduct the case, etc., will only be taken as a ground for adjourning if the party who has applied for the adjournment can satisfy that he could not have actually engaged any other pleader to conduct his case. Then only the court will grant adjournment on the grounds of illness or inability to conduct the case. Now, in a situation where you're praying for an adjournment, where the witness is present, but the party or the pleader is not present, or they are present in court, but they are not ready to examine the witness, in that case, the court, if it thinks fit, will record the statement of the witness and pass an order as it deems fit, and will dispense with chief examination or cross-examination of the witness as the case may be. So if you are a party who had called the witness and you would be conducting the chief examination in chief of the witness, and you do not want to do so, or you are not present in court but the witness is present, in that case the court will just take a statement in writing of the witness. Or if you're a party who was supposed to cross that particular witness, you're not wanting to do so, or you're not present in court, then you will not be allowed to do that once this statement of witness has been made. Now, this was rule 1. Rule 1 was saying that how can you till all the witnesses are examined, day to day hearing will be done. When can you adjourn it? Not more than 3 times adjournments can be granted. Cause can be given to you. Exceptional reasons only beyond the control of the parties. If the circumstances, then only the adjournment will be granted. Grounds like engagement of pleader in another court is not a ground for adjournment. Illness or inability to conduct the case can be a ground of adjournment, provided you can satisfy the court that you have not engaged any other pleader. And another, if a witness is present, party or the pleader is not present, or present but not wanting to examine, then court may record a statement and dispense with examination of chief or cross-examination. Then what is the next rule? Rule 2 states that when the parties fail to appear on the date fixed, like you have you have asked for adjournment and the case was adjourned, but you did not appear. Now, court will decide in accordance to Order 9, that was appearance and non-appearance of parties. And if the court thinks that if you actually the evidence has been taken, substantial portion of evidence already recorded, your appearance, non-appearance won't make any difference, then the court can proceed as if the parties had appeared. Now, what is Rule 3? Rule 3 states that when notwithstanding may proceed with it, notwithstanding either party is failing to produce evidence, etc., or time was given for the same. You were given time to give evidence or call your witness or any other act. You had asked for it. Time was also allowed, but you failed. Then the courts, what the court can do, if the parties are present, then it may proceed to decide the suit. And if the parties are absent, then it will go according to Rule 2, which states that because they had asked for the time and they did not appear, we'll go on to Order 9. So this was Order 17, which was talking about adjournments, where we saw that in general, once a hearing of a suit is beginning, it will continue until the final disposal of the suit, unless there are reasons that are there under Rule 1, Rule 2, when they are not appearing, and Rule 3, when you yourself had asked time for evidence, witnesses, and other acts, etc. You had asked for adjournment and you did not do so. You had asked for adjournment for producing evidence, witness, any other things, and you did not do so. If you are present, the suit may be decided. If you're absent, then we'll go according to Rule 2. Now, this was adjournment. We saw summons given to the witnesses. We saw adjournments happening. Now we will move on to the main trial part, where we are actually hearing the suit and the examination of the witnesses are taking place. This is Order 18. Now, Section 153B and Order 18, Rule 19 state that evidence is always to be taken in an open court orally. Okay. Like under personal direction and superintendence of the judge, it should be an open court so that a healthy, objective, and fair administration of justice is being done. But however, there are certain occasions where an in-camera proceeding, according to the need and the situation, an in-camera proceedings should be done. So Section 153B is putting open court, evidence to be taken in open court as sort of the general norm. However, it was seen that this recording of oral evidence of witnesses in open court and under the judge, etc., was a very time-consuming process. Already, we are suffering with a backlog of cases. We have delayed litigation. Cases take too much time to be decided. So by the 2002 amendment, it was mandated that instead of oral evidence, you can also record the evidence by a commissioner. Now, before moving on to that, just going a little bit to Evidence Act. Section 102 of Evidence Act talks about burden of proof. The burden of proof is that if I have come to the court, I want the court to give certain relief based on certain things. certain facts or laws, then it is my duty to prove that yes, such and such facts happened, or such and such law is applicable in such a situation. So the burden of proof is always on that party whose cause will fail if no evidence is given. So from here, under Rule 1, we'll first try to understand who has the first right to begin. Generally, because the plaintiff has come to the court first, so the plaintiff has a right to begin. But if a defendant admits all the facts that the plaintiff has said, that says, yes, I admit whatever you are saying, but he contends that either on fact or either on law or additional facts that he's trying to plead, that the plaintiff is not entitled to any part of the relief that he is seeking, then in that case, the defendant will begin. So in generally, the plaintiff begins, but if defendant admits all, but he is alleging certain other facts, etc., on the basis of which he is saying that he's not entitled, then the defendant will begin. Then what happens? Now the Rule 2 will state the statement and production of evidence. Now, whatever day was fixed or adjourned date, whatever, the party which has the right to begin will begin. He will state his case, he will produce his evidence in support of his issues, which he is bound to prove. Now, the other party will come and state his case, he will produce an evidence, and after that, the other party has a right to address the court generally on the same issue. Now, next, what will happen? Now, after he has addressed it generally, then the first party who had begun will reply on the same. Now, apart from the oral arguments, and shall, before the conclusion of oral arguments, with the court's permission, they can also submit written arguments to the court, which will form a part of the court's record. And the copies of any written arguments submitted have also to be given to the opposite side. Now, no adjournments have to be given for filing of written statements. Just on the mere ground of filing of written statements, there can be no adjournment unless the court feels that it is necessary. And the court also has a power that it can fix the time limit for the oral arguments by either of the party as it deems fit. Now, that was what happens after the parties has begun. Once the party has begun, he'll produce his case, give his evidence. Then the other party comes, gives his case, gives his evidence, comments generally, addresses the court generally on the same. Then the party who began will reply on the same. There can be written arguments that can be given, of which copy has to be given to the other side. And the court also has the power to fix a time limit for the oral arguments. Now, if there are evidence on several issues, where for some issues the burden of proof is on the opposite side, then the party who is beginning may, at his option, may produce evidence. It is his option that he may produce evidence for those facts itself, or he may serve it as an answer to the evidence which is produced by the other party. So basically, this is why burden of proof, depending on the burden of proof, it becomes important. Because of the burden of proof, for anybody trying to bring a suit, the burden of proof is lying on them. So that is why they are getting the right to begin. But there may be certain issues for which the burden of proof is lying on the opposite side. So in those cases, it is the option of the party, but that they may either produce evidence on their issues first, or they will serve it by the means of an answer. If they are serving it as an answer, then the other party may also reply to the same. Now, Rule 3A states that if a party himself is wanting to appear as a witness, then he will appear before all the witnesses that he wants to, that he has called on his behalf, unless the court is permitting him to appear afterwards. He would be the first witness to be examined if a party wants to appear as a witness. Then Rule 4 is talking about recording of evidence. Now, what is recording of evidence? Now, examination of chief can be taken on affidavits. You can give the copies to the opposite side. Cross and re-examination can be done by the court or by the commissioner, as we saw. So there it can be recorded in writing or mechanically by a judge in the presence. Now, if a commissioner is recording it, he will make a written and a signed report to the court, and a commissioner also has a power to write comments relating to the demeanor of a witness while examination, that he was feeling scared, he was quite taken aback by the question, or such statements can be included in that particular signed report. He will also mention that such and such objections were taken while I was recording the evidence, and on those objections the commissioner will not decide, but the court will decide on these objections. And where should be the report be submitted? It should be submitted within 60 days of the appointment of the commissioner, unless time is extended in writing by the court. And if you're filing any documents, then proof and admissibility of such documents also needs to be filed. Now, what is Rule 5 stating? that what would be the evidence in appealable cases. Here you have to put down in the language of the court. It should be in writing, by or in presence and superintendence of the judge, or by the direction of a judge directly on the typewriter. That is the language. Whatever evidence is being recorded should be in the language of the court. Now, Rule 6 is talking about when the language is like the court is recording it in a different language, and I am speaking in Hindi while giving my deposition. I said, उस दिन उस इंसान ने मेरे प्रॉपर्टी पे कब्जा कर लिया. I am stating it in Hindi, the court is recording it in English. If there is any controversy that is arising, it should be interpreted in the language in which I had given my deposition, not in the language in which it was recorded. Now, this is about Rule 6 in general. Rule 9 is talking about when evidence can be taken in English. Rule 10 is talking about that court on its own or on its application of the parties, it can write down particular answers, questions, and objections. If it feels that there are special reasons for actually specifically recording it, court can do so. Now, rule number 11 is talking about the objections that have been taken. Like somebody has objected to a particular question being asked, but that objection was allowed. As such, then you need to write the question, or it was allowed, the person was allowed to continue with the question, then you have to write the question, then the answer, then the person who was objecting, and what did the court decide, whether it decided to allow the objection or did it not allow the question to be proceeded with, etc. That also has to be written. Now again here, rule 12, as the commissioner has powers to write remarks on the demeanor of witness, the court can also do the same. Now, rule number 13 is talking if unappealable case, then it is not necessary to record the evidence in great detail. A memo of the substance of each deposition can be written by a judge and signed by him, and it forms a part of the record. Now, what is the power of the court? Now, there may be cases because of frequent transfers, etc. There may be cases that are partly heard, evidence that has been partly taken by another judge, and he has, because of death or transfer or any other cause, he is prevented from further proceeding with this case. So the successor can deal with that evidence or memorandum as if he himself had taken it, and he will proceed from the case stage of the suit from where the predecessor had left it. This particular rule will also be applicable in the case of transfer of suits. Now, next is rule number 16. This is examination D bene is. I'm sorry if I have pronounced it wrong. Here, what happens? You are seeing that generally all witnesses are to be examined at hearing, not before. This is an exception here where you feel that the witness might be leaving the jurisdiction of the court or any other sufficient cause, and that deposition needs to be recorded immediately. Then on application of the party or the witness, at any time after the suit has been instituted, before the hearing, they may take such evidence of the witness, and if they are not taking it on the same day, they can fix another day. Now, this particular evidence has to be read over to that person. That person will admit that yes, whatever has been written is correctly written. That person will sign. Then the judge will make necessary corrections if he feels so, and he may also sign that. And this may be read at the time of hearing as a relevant evidence. If it is required at any point, then at that point, this particular statement can be read. Now, what does rule number 17 say that? Obviously, court has the power to recall and examine a witness at any stage and put another questions to him. And rule 18 is that the court also has a power to inspect any property or any other thing in concerning which a question is arising. And if the court is doing so, it has to make a memorandum of the relevant facts of such an inspection, and it will also form a part of the record. And rule 19 is stating that instead of going for an open court, you can also get these statements recorded as commissions. So here we are concluding with the trial part, where we saw that order 16, we saw the summons to witnesses. I'm not going back again. We tried to revise that once. Order 17, we saw when adjournments are being granted. We saw in brief how the adjournments were granted. It was the court's discretion. You should try to continue till the final disposal. Continue day by day till all the witnesses had been examined, etc. If they had asked for time, did not appear, order 9 will be applicable, etc. And then we saw order 18, which was hearing of a suit. Here we saw two things. Either rule 9 was telling us either it is open court or a commissioner, and section 153B you can see there. Then who has the right to begin? Generally it is the plaintiff. Next, it can also be the defendant, and the party, whoever will begin, will state the case, evidence, then the other party will reply, give evidence, deal generally with the case. Then the first party who began will reply. Written arguments can be given. party on whom burden of proof lies, written arguments can be given, but then they can, if the party himself wants to be examined as a witness, he will come first. All the evidence needs to be recorded. The language of the evidence has to be seen according to the rules. What would be the difference in an appealable case, recording of evidence in an appealable case and an unappealable case? Unappealable case, only a memorandum of the same will do, no need to put it in record. Remarks as to the demeanor can be given. Objections can be noted down. Special questions, answers, objections can be noted down. They can deal with the evidence taken out by another judge. They have a power to recall a witness. They can examine a witness before hearing. They can also inspect property, etc. So this was all about trial, where we saw the hearing of the suit taking place. We saw the adjournments, and we saw the summoning of witness. So now we are seeing that the suit has been heard. Now what will happen? Now next thing that will follow on, next thing that will follow on is judgment and decree. Now, as I already stated, there will be intermediary, a lot many things that can happen. This we are not dealing today. We'll be dealing in another class. And I know the lecture is going a little long, but we'll try and cover judgment and decree also. So judgment and decree, the relevant order first is order 20. Now, section 33 is also relevant here, which states that the court, after it has heard the cause, it will pronounce a judgment, and then the decree will follow. So you remember, whenever we took the statement that first a judgment comes and then the decree will follow, this comes from section 33. Now, what is a judgment? We have already dealt this under section 2+9, and we'll see the relevant rules under order 20. So rule 1 of order 20 states that when a judgment needs to be pronounced. Now, after the case has been heard, the judgment will be pronounced by court in an open court, either at once. As soon as the case has been heard, it can decide at once, or as soon as it is practicable, or it may fix a future date that, okay, on this particular date, the judgment will be pronounced and due notice of the same can be done. Now, if a court is not pronouncing judgment at once, then the court should try that it should at least pronounce a judgment within 30 days from the date of conclusion of the hearing. And if it is not possible, then it will do for another day. So maximum 60 days from the date of conclusion of hearing, the court should try to pronounce the judgment. Now, if a written judgment is to be passed, then the court does not need to read the entire judgment. It will just read the findings on each issue and the final order. That will be enough. That pronunciation is enough. Now, if the judgment is being pronounced by dictation in an open court, by a shorthand writer, etc., then after the transcription has been pronounced, corrections have been made, then it can be signed and dated by the judge. Now, next thing, again, as we see, obviously here also a judge can pronounce a judgment which was not written by him, which was written by his predecessor, but was not pronounced by his predecessor. His successor can pronounce the same. So here the important thing is that the only thing is that the judgment should not be pronounced by the predecessor. It should be written by him. If it was written by him, then he can pronounce the same. Now, rule 3 is saying that the judgment needs to be signed. It should be dated in an open court at the time. It should be dated. It should be signed. And once it is being signed, that is the importance. The moment a signature is put on a judgment, you cannot alter it except in accordance with section 152, which also calls for only minor alterations or on review. These are the only two situations where a signed judgment can be altered. Now, rule 4 is stating that what would a judgment of a small causes course contain? It will contain the points of determination and the decision. And other courts, what are the 4 points? Concise statement of the case should be there first. Then you'll tell what are the points that you had to determine, what decision you have taken, and what are the reasons. This is what rule 4 is telling you. Now, rule 5 is saying that the court has to state the decision on each of the issues framed. You have to, on each of the issues independently, you have to separately with reasons give that on this issue I have decided this because of this. Unless you can feel that with one reasoning to 1 or 2 or more issues are getting resolved. Now, rule 5A is saying that if the courts, if in the particular suit, parties were appearing and they were not represented by their pleaders, then the court also has a duty to inform them about which court the appeal will lie, what is the period of limitation, and they have to also and all these factors have to be placed on record. And 6b states that copies of judgment have to be made available immediately after pronouncement on payment of charges by the parties. And Rule 20 says that certified copies of decrees and judgments have to be given to the parties. So Order 20, Rule 1 to 5, in general, Rule 1 to 5, what we have seen, we have tried to see the fact that we have seen section 2.9, rule 1859, that you have to pronounce it once or later or fix a date, maximum at least 60 days if you try to pronounce from the date of conclusion of hearing. If it is written, don't need to read the whole thing. If you have dictated it, then correct it, sign it and date it. Now you can pronounce a written judgment by your predecessor, which he had not pronounced. You need to sign a judgment. It is very important that as the moment it is signed, it cannot be altered except under section 153 or on review, that is under 114. Small causes court only has to put down the points of determination and decision, and other courts have to also include, other than points of determination decision, a concise statement of the case and the reasons why they are deciding so. And for every issue, you have to state the decision separately, and copies of judgments have to be made available. Now, this was all for judgment, and next we'll see what is a decree. Now, we already under section 33 we saw that a decree will follow a judgment, and in section 2 clause 2 also we have seen what is a decree, so we do not need to go what exactly is a decree. So rule 6 we'll see of order 20 states that the contents of the decree should first agree with the judgment. It should also contain the suit number, name, description, and registered addresses of the parties, particulars of the claim, what relief has been granted, and how the suit has been determined. If any cost has been incurred, and what out of what property it has to pay, what proportions has to be paid, that also has to be done. And it can also direct how set-off can be claimed, etc. Now, Rule 6A states that a decree should be prepared within 15 days of pronouncement of a judgment. Now, if that is not done, then how will you prefer appeal? If you have not gotten a copy of a decree, then judgment can also suffice for the same. But as soon as a decree is drawn up, judgment will not be doing the same thing. You can go through Rule 6A. Then rule number 7 says that what would be the date of a decree? The date of a decree would be the same as the date of the judgment on which it was pronounced. And if the judge is satisfied that yes, the decree is in accordance with the judgment, he will sign it. Now, rule 8 says that what is the procedure if a judge has vacated his office before signing the decree, then the successor can sign. Like he has drawn up the decree, everything he has done, just he has not put his signature, then the successor can come and sign it. And if in the situation where the court has ceased to exist, then in that case, that signing will be done by a court to which this particular court in which he was sitting and he had passed that decree, to which this court was subordinate to. So a higher court to that decree, a judge of that court will sign that particular decree. Now, rule 9 to 19 in general are special circumstances where what should be done in these special circumstances. We are doing some of them. Like rule 9, if it is a decree for an immovable property, you have to write down the property particulars, like these are the boundary numbers, these are identification numbers, this is a plot number, etc. All those details should be there. Rule number 10 is stating that if it is a decree for delivery of movable property, then apart from that, the amount of money which may be payable in the alternative to the delivery of such movable property should be mentioned. Now, rule 11 to 18, 11 to 18, you can also go through once. As I'd already told, 9 to 19 are the special occasions, special instances, what will happen if it is dealing with the immovable property, if it is an administration suit, etc. Now, another special occasion that we deal with is that a decree where set-off or counterclaim is being allowed. In that situation, decree will state what amount is due to the plaintiff, what amount is due to the defendant, and what amount has to be recovered from whichever party that is appearing to. You have to write both the amounts, whatever is due to both of them, and then who has to recover from who. Now, appeal, if anybody is going from a decree from a set-off, which also has a set-off or a counterclaim, it will be subject to the same provisions of appeal as if no set-off or counterclaim had been claimed. Now, these rules will apply irrespective of the fact whether that particular set-off was admissible under Rule 6 of Order 8 or not. Now, Rule 20, have we already seen that certified copies of judgment and decree have to be furnished to parties on application to the court at their expense. So, as we had already seen in a nutshell about the judgment, we can go through what is there for the decree. Again, section 2 clause 2, rule 60 to 20. Now here, firstly, it has to agree with the judgment, the suit number, the name, address, description of parties, particulars of claim, relief that is given. All that has to be there in a decree. It has to also state the costs that are any that are imposed. It should be within 15 days of the judgment pronouncement. The date will be the same. If a predecessor has not signed the decree, then the successor can sign it. If a movable property is there, you have to state the particulars. If a delivery of movable property is in question, then this amount of money to be paid in alternative has to be stated. Rule 11 to 19 are the specific scenarios. For specific kinds of decrees like administration suit decrees, immovable property decrees, etc. Sorry, rule 9 to 19. And set off and counterclaim, if is claimed in a particular case, then you have to state the amounts due to both the parties and who has to pay whom, that has to be stated. And obviously copies of judgment and decrees has to be furnished to the parties. So this was all about judgment and decree. So in today's class, what we have seen, let's go back in just 5-10 seconds or whatever. We can try to recall that what we had done, because we have covered quite a number of topics today. Firstly, we went for the first hearing. We went to the first hearing. We understood what is first hearing, the parties' examination at first hearing. Parties were being examined at first hearing. Then, just a second. Yeah. So first we were seeing parties' examination by the court. Then we had seen the settlement of issues under Order 14. Then we went on to how under Order 15 there was a disposal of suit at the first hearing. This was for all about a first hearing. Then we went to the trial part. In the trial part, we first dealt with Order 16, summon and attendance of witness, how it has been done. Then after we had called up witnesses, what did we do? Witnesses have been called. Then we dealt with the situations in which adjournments can be given. Adjournments we dealt under Order 17. After that, we dealt with the actual trial, that is a hearing of the suit and examination of witnesses under Order 18. And after that was done, logically we moved forward to Order 20, which was dealing with judgment and decree. So here with this class, with this lecture, in a way we have come to the point where we know, where we are knowing that how a suit is proceeding. We had started off with jurisdiction. We had started off with place of suing, understanding suits of civil nature and other such factors. Then we understood pleadings, we understood parties to a suit, we understood how to institute a suit, how would you frame a suit. Then we understood what is set off, what is counterclaim, how do you give summons, what will happen if somebody appears or does not appear, and all those aspects. So with today's class, I hope you have been able to trace back how it is coming to the conclusion, how we have derived to the conclusion of coming up to a judgment and a decree. And yes, there are other factors like interim orders, death, marriage, abatement, all these other aspects that we'll be dealing in the next class. I hope content wise and other factors also, other factors wise, this lecture was the same. And please let me know if I should continue doing the lectures with my video on. And I hope you like the classes. Please do like, share, and subscribe. And as already stated, the timestamps of all the topics that have been covered will be mentioned in the comments. And this is all for today's class. We'll meet again in the next lecture. Thank you.